G'day Grumpies, and welcome to episode 2 of Grumpy Old Bloke goes for his vinyl collection and a bit sad, generally speaking. So today we are doing AC/DC. As an Australian Brit, obviously they're a band that's very close to my heart, but more importantly, they are one of the most influential bands as far as my musical taste is concerned, and my entree into what is now heavy rock, classic rock, metal. Although I do go off at many tangents, as you will see if you will stay with me over a few of these episodes. However, AC/DC is the topic of the day. Very important one it is to me too. The other thing I will say as a caveat at the beginning of this program is I refuse to buy into the Australian pronunciation of AC/DC, which everybody thinks is extremely funny and I just think is naff. The other thing I hope to be able to bring to all of your attention during this period, especially those of you from my homeland of Australia, there are more than 3 tracks by AC/DC, and you know which 3 I'm talking about. So for the rest of you, welcome to episode AC/DC. In the words of Mary Poppins, where do we start? At the beginning, it's a very good place to start. I doubt if that's verbatim, I haven't watched it in years. Anyway, AC/DC, High Voltage, the Australian original release. Only came out in Australia officially. There is your track listing on the back there. It's very exciting. Some very early pictures of the band. This is on Albert Records. My apologies. There you go. On standard. Is that upside down? Yes, it is. On standard issue black vinyl. This is particularly special. As I say, this version was only available in Australia. There is another version of High Voltage. This version, and this is the international version. Now the international version of this, there's an alternative cover for this as well, which I would love, which is more Bon Scott in all sorts of bright colours in some kind of fancy pose. I have seen it. I actually saw it in record shops when it came out. I should have grabbed it at the time, shouldn't I? However, this is the international version. Now the difference between the international version and the original Australian version, apart from the fact that the international version is on Atlantic, I believe. Yep, on Atlantic. There you go. The main difference is that the international version was made up of the first 2 Australian AC/DC releases, that being the High Voltage that I have there, and TNT. Now, I thought I had a copy of TNT. I do on CD, obviously, but on vinyl. I am sure I had a copy of it. I have moved house a few times in the last few years, and maybe I've lost 1 or 2 along the way. I can't see how. But guess what? Guess who has another project? So I need to track down a copy of TNT. Anywho, the main difference between the international version, which is this, as I say, and the Australian version, is on this version, this contains just about every track from TNT, and virtually nothing from the original High Voltage. I think there's 2 tracks from the original High Voltage on here, which I believe is Little Lover and I can't remember something else. Can I sit next to you? Is it on both? I don't know, Little Lover anyway. So there is TNT. For me, when I was a young lad, it wasn't really worth buying because most of the tracks I already had on High Voltage, and these are in the days, of course, when money was tight. So I now have a project. And you may notice something else about a number of my AC/DC albums. I will come to that later on in this episode. We now move on to AC/DC's, well, depending on how you look at it, if you're Australian, 4th and 5th album. If you're anyone else in the world, their 3rd and 4th album. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, 1986. An absolute classic. This is the international version. This is on Atlantic Records, this particular version. Track listing accordingly up there, as you can see. Dirty Deeds is one of those tracks that gets a fair bit of airplay here in Australia still, which again, it's a bit limiting, but it's a great track. But I think for me, on this album, I think for many people, it contains Rocker and Problem Child, which are absolute classics, and as featured on the live album, which we will come to at some point. But Ride On this track, which is the second last track on side 2, is one of the very few bluesy ballads that AC/DC have ever done, and just highlights Bon Scott's voice just so beautifully. It was far more than the Screamer. Many people attribute him with being an awesome voice, and that the soul that comes out in that track. If you've not listened to it, I certainly advise Ride On. In 1977, that was followed by the classic Let There Be Rock. This is for many the quintessential AC/DC album purely because of that picture on the front, is when they were just a live band. I mean, that's what AC/DC are famous for, just being one of the greatest live bands I've ever seen, and I have seen them a dozen times at least, all over the world. And the iconic picture of Angus on the back, which I absolutely adore. Track listing, for those of you that are interested. Dog Eat Dog, they still play live. Bad Boy Boogie, they still play live. Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, they still play live. And another little song called Whole Lot of Rosie, for those of you that haven't heard of AC/DC. I'm amazed how you haven't heard of that track. So AC/DC, Let There Be Rock, an absolute classic. Oh, just so you know, that's also on Atlantic Records. There you go. On classic black vinyl. Obviously there's nothing that flash insofar as packaging was concerned in those days. I'm surprised AC/DC haven't got round to repackaging their collection yet, seeing as every other band seems to be doing 180 gram twin 3-packs or whatever, with booklets and pictures and stuff like that. I think it'd be very expensive, I'm sure, but there'd be an awful lot of people that would have a great deal of interest in that, I'm sure. Postscript, for those of you that are interested, I just putting the records away. I realised that in Dirty Deeds I've actually got the full lyric sheet as well, and some really old pictures of the boys on there as well. It's just a lovely little keepsake. Little things like that you forget, and you find them when you're going through your old collection. You know, makes the day worthwhile. Now, depending on what day of the week it is, if you ask me what my favourite studio AC/DC album is going to give you one of two answers, and one of them is this: Powerage. Now, for me, this is when AC/DC are absolutely hitting their peak. We're talking about 78, sorry, my apologies. 78. This is, for me, their I'm going to say something different later, I know. But one of my two favourite AC/DC studio albums. An absolute track listing that is absolutely amazing. Every single track on this album, for me, is a classic. This is one of the very few albums in my collection that would get a 10, from the perspective that there is not a bad track on it. Every single track is brilliant, and I could not recommend this strongly enough to anyone. Anyone trying to get into AC/DC, maybe you'd be put off by sort of what's happened in the last 30 years or so by the way they've been presented, but for real hardcore AC/DC at their absolute gritty, bluesy, hard rock best, you cannot go past this album. An absolute classic. On Atlantic, this is obviously like many of my records. They're the European or at least the British copies in imperfect condition. Of course, what else would you expect from me, people? Come on now. Now, the Powerage tour was recorded live. This particular album, If You Want Blood, you've got it. What can I say? One of my favourite albums of all time. For as far as live albums goes, is probably in my top 5, sometimes 3, sometimes 10, but it's always up there. One of the greatest live albums of all time, recorded in Glasgow, and I can't remember which auditorium it was, but I'm sure the Scots will let me know. Recorded in Glasgow, live, 1978 tour. I think this album was released in 79. No, it was released in 78. I thought it was released a year after, so that's my apology. So released in the same year as Powerage, which they were touring at the time. An absolute classic. More to it. I mean, look at that track listing. Look at that. There's not, again, a 10. There's not a bad track on there. Brilliantly played all the way through. Now, this album holds a particularly special place in my heart. I would have been, 1978, I would have been just 13, maybe. And most of the music that one heard when I grew up, certainly in the UK, was on the radio. And Radio 1, which was the only radio station that most of us got a chance to listen to, just played pap. Just pop music, essentially. So the heaviest thing I'd heard until this point probably was Seven Seas of Rye by Queen, who are a huge influence on me as well, but it's a long way off. Q's a long way off. So a friend of mine, I still remember his name, Rob Pritchard. If you're listening, Rob, mate, it's been a long time. How are you? Lent me his album, which is really, really kind of him, because I mean, how many people lend albums? Lent me this, and my life was changed. From the moment I heard the speaker hum at the beginning of Riff Raff, I was in. And from that point onwards, I knew this was the sort of music that I should be listening to. This was me. This is what I'd played around the edges with, some sort of harder edged popular stuff. Slade, Sweet, T-Rex to a smaller extent, but I'd heard a little bit of Led Zeppelin and stuff like that, but not extensively, because it was on the radio, and it wasn't played on the radio. But this album changed my life. Absolutely amazing. Whilst preparing for this, hang on, I'll just show you the vinyl. There it is, all in MoFis, of course, because they're a bit special. Actually, these covers are pretty expensive, but they're well worth it. Seriously, one thing I found when I was getting my If You Want Blood album out was this little insert, which I absolutely love, where you can buy all the merchandise. How much would this stuff be worth now? I don't know. But essentially, you could buy a T-shirt for £3. So £3 plus 30p postage and packaging. You'd probably multiply that by at least 10 nowadays. I would suggest probably more than that. But I just thought that was really, really cute. So T-shirts, sweatshirts. Oh, they were expensive. £5 for a sweatshirt. A Perspex badge for 70p. A button badge for 35p. A sew-on patch. Got a few of those on my battle jacket, which I might actually get out at some point. I haven't worn that I won't wear it bubbling at man of my age, but I've still got one. Stickers, full colour posters. I wish I'd bought them at the time, because I would love to own them now, to be fair. But there you go. I thought that was quite a little sweet addition into the collection. So, Powerage, the best, probably, studio album by AC/DC. If You Want Blood, probably, certainly their best live album. If not one of the greatest it is, without question, one of the greatest live albums ever released. Do yourself a favour. So we come to the last AC/DC album to feature Bon Scott. Of course, everyone would know Highway to Hell. Is this another 10? Wouldn't be far off. Absolutely brilliant. Again, came out in 1979, just before, obviously, Bon died, and I think Bon finally reached his life ambition and became the rock star he always wanted to be before it was cut so viciously short. But again, absolutely classic album. The only track for me on there that probably is not a 10 album is Get It Hot. And it's not a bad track, don't get me wrong, not a bad track at all. But for me, that probably scores a 9.5. So maybe Powerage does edge it when I start getting mathematical about it, or using some kind of system. There's the vinyl. Absolute classic. Now, a little story as far as this album is concerned. Well, not the album is concerned so much as the tour. I was brought up in a town called Southampton in England. Well, a little village just outside of there. Now, during the Highway to Hell tour, I had tickets to see AC/DC at Southampton Gaumont, as it then was. I believe it was still called the Gaumont in those days. And now what happened is, I think Bon, or one of the band anyway, Bon was unwell. I think it was cold or flu or something like that. And they cancelled the last few dates of the tour, of which Southampton was one. So we turned up to the gig. Gig was cancelled. Good old days. There was no interweb then. So off we all went. So as a result of that, they rescheduled the tour, well, not the whole tour, obviously, the missing dates, to go on to the very end of the tour. So when they'd finished the world tour, they came back and finished the dates that they'd missed in the UK. The very last date of that tour was at Southampton Gaumont, and I was fortunate enough to be there and see the band play at Southampton Gaumont. I would have to look up the date. I'm sure those aficionados, those people that care about details like that, would be able to look it up. That was Bon Scott's last live gig with AC/DC, and I was so privileged to be in that audience and part of that. And it fills me with sadness to this day that he's gone. But I just thank my lucky stars that I was able to see Bon live before he passed. I saw him a couple of times before that as well. But for me, his last ever gig, to be present at that is monumental, and something I'm immensely thankful for, but saddened by at the same time. So we say goodbye to Bon, and we introduce a new member of AC/DC. The last recorded words on Highway to Hell that Bon spoke on the studio recording was Shazbat Nanu Nanu. For those of you who get the reference, I think that's sort of a very Bon way to sign out, bless him. So now we have to ask the question, how black can it be? And the answer is none. None more black. Well, it could be a little bit more black because we had the white little bit at the top there, embossed back in black across there. Many of you would know this. Well, of course you'd know this album. This is, I believe, the second biggest selling album of all time. Whether that's after the Eagles' Hotel California or Thriller by Michael Jackson, I can never remember. I think it's the Eagles. Anyway, it's the second biggest selling album of all time. And when you consider you're talking about a hard rock band here, you're not talking about something that's overly popular with the masses. So this is mainly the hard rock fans and probably most of Australia buying this album. Track listing, again, very difficult to find an error in there. When you consider this album was recorded, I think Brian was recruited within weeks of Bon dying. I think the Young Brothers wanted to keep the momentum going, and probably the best way to work through their grief was to start recording again. I think, from memory, again, this isn't a fact show. This is a my opinion show, and if you want to write the facts down, by all means, share it. This is a community. Please share it. I think it came out within 7 months of Bon's death, which for some of us, myself included, was a little bit of a shock. A little bit maybe too soon, but in a way it helped me certainly to grieve, because at that age when Bon died, so in 1979 I would have been, how old would I have been? Not very old, 16 maybe, 15, 16. That was really the first rock star or anyone that I was particularly fond of that had passed away, had died. So it came a little bit of a shock, and I think it was a little bit of a passing into adulthood for me. So it's quite interesting. But anyway, Back in Black, classic album. And any of you who don't know Back in Black, really? What are you doing watching this show? Atlantic label, standard Atlantic label. This is again the British release. The inner sleeve, as you can see, just normal liner notes, and I'm not too sure what Brian's doing down in the corner there, but I don't think he's used to posing for magazines yet. I love that picture of Cliff, actually, it's awesome. But there you go, AC/DC, Back in Black, absolute classic album. And then we move into the second of the pair, as I like to call them, the two post Bon Scott albums. For those about to rock, I'll say it this way, for those about to rock, we salute you. Gatefold sleeve. Can't find these covers anymore. They're difficult to find, the gatefold ones. And of course, usual track listing on the back. Getting a little bit carry on Mrs. Tongue in cheek with some of the titles. But some absolute classic tracks on there again. Can't really go wrong with this album. I mean, if you're collecting AC/DC albums, you go Powerage, Back in Black, Let There Be Rock, Highway to Hell. You can't go wrong with those. The slight variation on this one, I don't know if this is unusual. I don't know that it is. It's on the Atlantic label, as is a lot of their European stuff. On a gold label, maybe that was just a one-off. I'm not too sure. As I said, I don't really look into the value of my records. I mean, I can look it up on Discogs, of course. But I don't really look at the value of my records because I don't intend to sell them unless things get really desperate. They're not looking too good right now, but I think I'd probably sell a lot of things before I ever sell any of my vinyl. I'm too close to it. So there you go. Back in Black. And for those about to rock, we salute you. We move into the early mid-80s, the first of the two that we're going to come, I consider a pair of albums which, by my standards for AC/DC anyway, are subpar. Flick of the Switch. This came out in 83, I think, he said, trying to check whilst he's talking, which is, again, not details, not my thing. Flick of the Switch. track listing on the back there. Look, there's some good... Coming back to it after all these years, there are some good tracks on here. Rising Power is good. Houses on Fire, Flick of the Switch is a classic. And then they sort of go off a little bit. Bedlam and Belgium. Oh, I don't know. Badlands is a good track from memory. There's some okay stuff on here, but coming off the back of the last 4 studio albums and the live album, I felt this was a bit below par. I know the critics didn't like it either. I don't buy into what the critics have to say as a general rule. I'd rather make my own opinion. That is available. Oh, hang on. I'll just pull the inner sleeve out for you. Nothing particularly interesting about the inner sleeve, just a few liner notes, and the album itself is on a white Atlantic label. I know some of you like this stuff, so do I. And then we go into the weaker of the pair, Fly on the Wall. Not a fan of this album, I have to say, even coming back to it a few years later. I'm just looking at the track listing now, and there really is nothing on there for me. The cover's great, but I don't think there's anything on there I particularly would listen to. Now, I don't know that they even play anything live off there. Not that they're playing at the moment anyway, but I was disappointed at that stage, and it took me quite a long time to have my faith restored in AC/DC. Inner Liner is lovely, actually. It's actually really nicely produced with the lyrics and the vinyl itself. On a reddy, sort of rusty coloured Atlantic label. So maybe Atlantic are trying to match the colour of the album sleeves with the label on the record, which seems it is. So look, they were disappointing. Now, which year was that? That one was 85, yeah, so 83, 85. Those 2 albums came out in reasonably quick succession. Wasn't really for me, I have to say. Now to another brace of AC/DC albums, from the late 80s, early 90s. From 1988, Blow Up Your Video album. I can't think of a single redeeming thing to say about it. I own it because I'm a completist, and I like to own the complete set. There's not a single track on here I like. And for me, at that point, I thought, they're a spent force. AC/DC's over. Gone. Not really interested anymore. So there's that. For those of you that are interested, 1988 this came out because of black inner sleeve and a standard Atlantic label. So there I was a couple of years later. I think it was 91, though the album came out in 90. The one I'm about to talk about. I'll hold it up, shall I? It's probably a good idea. Razor's Edge. No signing. Razor's Edge. I was up in Queensland backpacking. I hadn't moved to Australia at that point. I was backpacking in Australia. I was up in Queensland with my then girlfriend, and we were in a tropical bar for backpackers, and I heard the Razor's Edge track, the title track, on a tinny little tannoy radio thing they had up there, and my ears pricked up and went, that's AC/DC. Wow, that sounds alright. Went out and bought it, obviously on tape in those days, on cassette, because I was backpacking, so I was using a Walkman like any sensible person was in those days. The Razor's Edge was the track I heard on here. Now it does contain Thunderstruck, which all of you would know, because it gets played endlessly on the bloody radio, and it's probably the only track by AC/DC many people know. But for me, this was a bit of a return to form. 1990, the Razor's Edge came out. I wasn't expecting it. I'd sort of given up on them by then, I have to say. I was a little bit disappointed with the previous few albums. There was another album in there as well, which was the Who Made Who, I think, was in there as well. I don't have a copy of that, which was just a best of the later albums, but I figured I had everything on it anyway, so why would I need a best of? Razor's Edge, the label's quite good. I quite like the label on this one. Again, it's an Atlantic... I think it's an Albert record. No, I tell a lie. Albert record. So back to traditional. This is an AC/DC Australian copy. So there you go. The label's pretty cool on that. So for me, it was a little bit of a relief that AC/DC had returned to form. It sort of restored my faith a little bit. Although it's going to be a long time before we heard anything else from them. Before I move on to the latter albums by AC/DC, I just want to address this issue. The signatures. I was extremely fortunate. I was working with a lady a number of years ago. It would have been very early 90s. No, mid-90s. And her surname was Young. I won't give you her first name to protect her. But we worked together for, well, a couple of years, we were sort of good mates. And then she said at some point, there was a long weekend, a bank holiday weekend, and she said that her uncles were in town, and she was catching up with them over the long weekend, be Easter or whatever it was. Her uncles were in town, or she was going to a big family gathering where her uncles would be, and she hadn't seen them for ages because they'd been on world tour. Ears pop up. Then I'm thinking, Young. Her surname's Young. And I said, what are your uncles' names? Well, there you go. One was called Malcolm and one was called Angus. Put two and two together, I get all my albums signed. So, extremely fortunate that I worked with the girl for a couple of years before I put two and two together. I'm not quick. But there we go. So all my albums were signed up until the Blow Up Your video at the time, which give you a clue roughly what year it was. They were all signed by Angus and Malcolm. So for that, I'm eternally grateful. And I'm very proud to own them. I'm never going to separate with them. Don't bother asking. But there you go. That's how they got signed. As I mentioned earlier, AC/DC, whilst they've made some great studio albums and some less great studio albums, are a brilliant live band. And I've been fortunate enough to see AC/DC live north of a dozen times. Saw them first, saw them at Southampton Gammon, as I mentioned earlier on with Bon Scott. I've seen them at Wembley Arena, I've seen them at Castle Donington, I've seen them in Sydney, I've seen them in Melbourne, I've seen them in Perth. I think I saw them in Nebworth, or could be making that up. Either way, I've seen them a number of times live, and whatever they do, they never ever fail to give just a wonderful show. Recorded during the 1991 tour, I believe, AC/DC Live. I shall look it up for you. Recorded during the 1991 tour, live AC/DC, considering this is just a beautifully packaged album. That's the balloon that comes up during Whole Lot of Rosie, for those of you who haven't seen them live. A few credits on the inside there. Beautifully packaged album. I love it. I love a gatefold sleeve. I'm a sucker for a gatefold. Starts with Thunderstruck, if I could even say it, would better. Thunderstruck, which is one of the interminable tracks that I do like, but I'm just play something else, radio, please. If AC/DC come on, play something else. Shit Thrill, Back in Black, Sin City, Who Made Who, that's on side one. Jailbreak Jack, Razor's Edge, Dirty Deeds, Hell's Bells, Heat Seeker, That's Why I Wanna Rock On. Well, that's on there. That's the world tour. High Voltage, You Shook Me All Night Long, Whole Lot of Rosie, Let There Be Rock, Highway to Hell, TNT for those about to rock. Classic album. It's actually beautifully packaged on the inside as well. These are the inner sleeves, which I shall share with you. Really nicely packaged album. Very, very colourful. This is the other inner sleeve. There we go. Some great pictures of the band and a little bit about the tour going down the side. Interestingly enough, this was not recorded in one arena. It was recorded on 23, I believe, of the dates of that tour. And a compilation. It's not... Yes, it's a live album. I'm a bit of a purist. I like live albums to come from one night, or maybe two. You take the best cuts from a couple of nights, which is understandable. I actually like to hear mistakes and errors and mistimings and stuff like that. It makes it more real. But anyway, that was taken from 23 dates. The vinyl itself, I won't show you them both, but this is essentially what the vinyl looks like. AC/DC personalised labels on the Albert label, which I believe is part of Sony now, or if it was before that, I'm not too sure. But there you go. AC/DC's second live album, a double live album. For me, nowhere near as good as If You Want Blood, but then that would be a difficult thing to achieve for any band, including the band themselves. So we're going to take a little bit of a leap forward in time now. AC/DC released Stiff Upper Lip and Ballbreaker after the Razor's Edge. Didn't buy them on vinyl, mainly because you couldn't get them on vinyl at the time. This was the age of CD, and CD was pretty much the only way you could get hold of these things. So, note to self, I probably need to get copies of those on vinyl, though, of course, original vinyls are going to be extremely rare and very difficult to come by, but I'll have to keep my eye open for those. So that, again, this is part of me doing this process, is in order for me to find gaps in my collection where I need to fill. It's easy to think that you've got something and then you haven't. I mean, the amount of record fairs I've been to and seen TNT and thought, oh, I got that. I didn't have it. Wow. So we're going to leap forward in time to 2008. for the Black Ice album. Now, I saw them on this tour as well. Absolutely superb live, as they always are. Beautiful gatefold sleeve. It's very difficult to pick up on camera here. Oh no, it's coming up better on camera than it is my eyes, I think. And there's the back cover. Yep, it's coming out better on here than it is live. Nothing particularly classic on this track. Not for me anyway. I suppose Rock and Roll Train opened the gig. Opened the gig from memory. And the actual title track on here. But there's nothing particularly outstanding. But it's a good, solid AC/DC album. Beautifully packaged. These are the inner sleeves. Catching the glare there, sorry. Beautifully packaged, as you can see. I'll hold it that way, shall I? There you go. And on Columbia Records, which is interesting, on a silver version, on a silver label there. I've got a feeling this is an American. I think I may have had to get this on import, unless it's I'm not too sure where I got this one from, actually. Yeah, I think it's an American copy. But there you go. Black Ice. There's the other one. So double disc and a gatefold sleeve, beautifully packaged. Not an outstanding album, but it's a good, solid AC/DC album. And when you're an AC/DC fan, you've got to collect them. And as I say, got a little sticker from the front as well. There, not completely silly. I like to collect absolutely everything. So that's Black Ice. I've said a number of times that I'm a bit of a sucker for good packaging. This absolutely rock or bust by AC/DC. I guess you can catch it on there. Hologrammatic cover on it, which I absolutely love. It's a double. Well, it's a gatefold sleeve. That's a bit. It's Malcolm's guitar led next to Angus's there. And there we go. That's the track listing. Malcolm had a lot to do with the writing of the songs, but yeah, well, I won't harp on that. There we go. So that's beautifully packaged. Now on the inside as well, there comes a book with this as well, a booklet, which is just absolutely. Probably can't do it on here, but it's absolutely beautiful. Of the band, absolutely fantastic. Stevie Young in here, of course, was the rhythm guitar on the album and on the tour. Yes, I saw them on this tour as well. The actual album itself comes lovely in a sleeve. It's on the Columbia label again. Rock or Bust. Beautiful album, beautifully produced. Again, it's not, you know what? It's not an amazing album. It's certainly not groundbreaking, but it just shows that AC/DC still have it. They can still deliver a good, solid rock album, and there's no one else really that can beat them at what they do. This one also comes with a CD, a copy of the album, and that's just the thing off the vinyl, off the front, off the packaging, the shrink wrap at the front. So Rock or Bust, AC/DC. Again, not an album I listen to very often, but you know, you have to own it. And the final album in the AC/DC collection, on vinyl anyway, is Power Up, which is the most recent album. It came out a couple of years ago now. I think it was just before the international breakdown. I think it was 2018, something like that. So beautiful again, gatefold sleeve, lovely inner sleeve there as well. I did notice that on the inside there's lovely some artwork on the inside of the cover there as well, which you can't really make out, and I'm certainly not going to take it apart in order to show you. So there we go. This is the inner sleeve itself. Again, beautifully packaged. Vinyl, personalised. AC/DC. I'm sorry, let me show you there. There's Angus. There you go. Well, I think it's Angus. I assume it's Angus. So beautifully produced. But I have another version of the same album, basically because at the time I was working and, you know, who cares? I could afford it. Now I can't. So the only difference between this album and the last album is exactly the same packaging. Everything else is the same. Only this one comes on yellow vinyl. So I think this was a JB Hi-Fi exclusive. I'm not too sure if it was or not, but saw it, had to have it. The other thing I have for this particular album is the CD with the plug-in page as well, which opens up and flashes AC/DC and plays a little bit of the title track of the album as well. So there we go. This brings my AC/DC vinyl collection to a close. If nothing else, it's given me some homework to do. I have to get a copy of TNT, an original copy of that. I need to get a copy of Ball Breaker, and what was the other one? There was another one. I'll have to watch my own videos and find out what it was, and get copies of those to make sure that the set is complete. Now, as I said, I do have just about everything on CD as well. So anything I've missed from the collection here, please let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Once again, thanks for joining me. This has been really, really exciting to go through AC/DC. It's a band I love and I've been close to. Have had a lot of meaning in my life. So the next episode, or the next few episodes, are going to feature the letter B. Now, I have at least 4 bands that have the word black at the beginning of their title, and I'm toying up whether or not I'm going to do a Beatles edition or not, because there's so many Beatles purists out there. I know I'm going to cop it, so perhaps I will anyway, just to annoy them. I'm far from a hardcore Beatles fan, but I do love the Beatles very much, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But certainly B is going to be broken into 2, maybe even 3 sections. There's a lot of B. I'm looking over to my right now thinking, yeah, that's going to be at least 3. So I look forward to episode 1 of B coming up hopefully in the next week. I'll get that up for you. In the meantime, stay grumpy, look after yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Press all the buttons down there to help me out if you would. I'd really appreciate it. All the best. See you, grumpies.